What happens when one unexpected question on a live daytime talk show transforms a routine celebrity interview into a moment that leaves an entire studio holding its breath? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Prime Spotlight, like this video, and comment below with your thoughts, because today's story explores how one conversation can unexpectedly change everything. The studio lights glowed across the familiar stage as the audience settled into their seats, the excitement inside the room building with every passing second. Producers hurried behind the cameras, stage assistants whispered into headsets, and the countdown clock ticked toward another live broadcast. Emily Blunt waited just behind the curtain, calm and composed. She had spent years navigating interviews across the world. Premieres, award shows, press tours. She understood how conversations could take surprising turns, but she also believed that respect mattered. Every interview was an opportunity to discuss creativity, filmmaking, and the stories that connected audiences around the globe. Today's appearance was supposed to celebrate her newest project. Nothing more. Across the stage, the hosts exchanged quiet conversation while the audience applauded as the show began. The opening segment flowed naturally. Laughter echoed through the studio. The panel discussed current entertainment headlines before introducing their special guest. And joining us today, the announcer said warmly, please welcome the incredibly talented Emily Blunt. The audience erupted. Emily stepped onto the stage wearing a welcoming smile, waving gracefully before greeting each host one by one. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed her first. Joy Behar offered a cheerful greeting. Sarah Haynes complimented Emily on her recent work. Sunny Hostin smiled politely as Emily took her seat. For the first several minutes, everything unfolded exactly as expected. They discussed filming challenges. Emily laughed while describing humorous moments from the set. She praised her castmates. The audience responded with warm applause after nearly every answer. Behind the cameras, producers relaxed. This was exactly the interview they had planned. Then Sunny gently leaned forward. I've always wondered something, she began thoughtfully. People often describe you as incredibly private compared with many Hollywood stars. Do you think public figures sometimes owe audiences more openness than they're willing to give? The question wasn't hostile. Not yet. Emily smiled politely before answering. I think every actor finds a balance, she replied. People enjoy our work because of the characters we play. The person behind those performances still deserves a private life. Several audience members nodded. Sunny listened carefully. But don't you think, she continued, that audiences who support someone's career naturally become curious about who that person really is? Emily folded her hands comfortably. Curiosity is perfectly understandable, she answered. Entitlement is something different. The audience grew quieter. It wasn't an argument, but something had shifted. Sunny tilted her head. So where should that line be? Emily paused before speaking. I think everyone draws it differently. The cameras captured every expression, every pause, every subtle glance. Joy leaned forward with interest. I imagine there have been times you've wished reporters had asked about your work instead of your personal life. Emily laughed softly. More than once. The audience laughed with her. For a moment, the tension disappeared. But Sunny wasn't finished. I understand privacy, she said carefully, but celebrities also influence public conversations. Isn't there some responsibility that comes with that? Emily's smile became more thoughtful. I believe responsibility comes with honesty. Sunny nodded. And honesty sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations. Emily met her eyes. I agree. Another pause settled across the stage. The audience sensed that neither woman intended to interrupt the other. Instead, each seemed determined to explain her perspective. Sunny continued. Some people might say avoiding certain questions creates distance between celebrities and ordinary people. Emily remained composed. Or perhaps, she answered gently, it simply reminds everyone that actors are ordinary people. That sentence landed differently. The audience reacted with scattered applause. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged quick glances. Nobody had expected the conversation to become this reflective. Sunny smiled politely but remained focused. I don't disagree, she said. But there are moments when silence from influential people is interpreted as avoidance. Emily considered the point before responding. I think silence can sometimes mean someone is protecting something valuable. What kind of thing? A family, a friendship, a personal struggle, peace. The audience became completely silent. Emily wasn't speaking defensively. She wasn't raising her voice. She simply answered each question with calm certainty. Sunny leaned back slightly. So you believe the public doesn't always deserve answers? Emily smiled. I believe kindness sometimes means accepting that not every answer belongs to us. Even Whoopi glanced toward the audience, noticing how intensely everyone was listening. There were no interruptions. No shouting. Only a conversation becoming unexpectedly profound. Sarah finally stepped in. I actually think that's something many people can relate to. Emily nodded gratefully. Sunny acknowledged the comment before asking one final question. If someone misunderstands your silence, does that bother you? Emily looked toward the audience before answering. It used to. She paused. Now I realize people usually create stories when they don't have enough facts. That's human nature. The room remained perfectly still. Emily continued quietly. I've learned that I can't control assumptions. I can only control how respectfully I respond. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Even the cameras seemed to linger longer than usual. The atmosphere inside the studio had changed completely. What began as a routine celebrity interview had transformed into something more personal, more reflective, and far more emotionally charged than anyone anticipated. Behind the control room glass, producers debated whether to cut to commercial early. The director quietly counted the remaining seconds in the segment. Sunny looked across the table with a thoughtful expression. Emily returned the look with calm confidence. Neither appeared angry. Neither intended to embarrass the other. Yet everyone in the room could feel an invisible line had been crossed. Not through hostility, through conviction. As the audience waited for the next question, the silence itself became louder than any applause. And no one inside that studio, not the hosts, not the producers, not even Emily herself, could have predicted where the conversation would go after the commercial break. The audience barely had time to exhale before the studio lights shifted for the commercial break. Conversations immediately erupted across the front rows. Some people leaned toward one another, quietly debating what they had just witnessed. Others simply sat in thoughtful silence, replaying every exchange in their minds. Emily Blunt remained composed. She accepted a glass of water from a production assistant, thanked them with a smile, and stayed exactly where she was. There was no frustration on her face, no sign of anger. Instead, she appeared reflective, as though she understood that thoughtful conversations often became the ones people remembered the longest. Across the table, Sunny Hostin glanced toward one of the producers, who gave a subtle nod from behind the cameras. The show was still on schedule, but everyone knew the atmosphere had changed. The planned questions suddenly felt less important than the unexpected discussion unfolding in front of millions of viewers. A stage manager counted down from 10. The familiar music returned. The applause sign illuminated. The audience responded enthusiastically as the broadcast resumed. We're back, Whoopi said warmly, smiling toward both Emily and her fellow hosts. And we've been having quite an interesting conversation. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience, easing some of the tension. Sunny smiled politely. I think conversations like these matter, she said. People don't always agree, and that's perfectly okay. Emily nodded. I couldn't agree more. The exchange sounded simple. Yet everyone sensed there was still more left unsaid. Joy Behar leaned forward first. Emily, you've worked with directors from all over the world. Every production has different personalities, different pressures. Has there ever been a moment when someone completely misunderstood your intentions? Emily thought for a second before answering. Absolutely. She smiled softly. And usually it wasn't because anyone meant harm. Most misunderstandings begin because people hear only part of what someone is trying to say. The audience listened carefully. I've learned not to rush into defending myself every single time, she continued. Sometimes clarification works better than confrontation. Sunny looked genuinely interested. So you don't believe every disagreement needs a winner? Emily laughed quietly. No. I think conversations become stronger when nobody feels they have to win. Several audience members applauded. Sunny waited for the applause to fade before asking another question. But public conversations often become polarized. Viewers expect people to take firm positions. Emily folded her hands. They do. And sometimes that expectation becomes the problem. What do you mean? I think people forget there's a difference between certainty and understanding. The words lingered in the air. Even the crew behind the cameras appeared unusually attentive. Sarah Haynes smiled. I like that. Emily continued. You can feel strongly about something while still recognizing someone else's experience. Sunny nodded thoughtfully. So if someone challenged your opinion publicly, I'd rather understand why they disagree before deciding they're wrong. The audience responded with another round of applause. Whoopi smiled. That sounds easier said than done. Emily laughed. It definitely is. The laughter spread across the studio, briefly restoring the relaxed mood that had existed earlier. But Sunny wasn't finished exploring the topic. She leaned forward again. Let me ask you something hypothetical. Emily smiled. Those are usually the dangerous questions. The audience laughed loudly. Sunny laughed as well. Fair enough. She continued. If someone watching today believes public figures should answer every difficult question because they're influential, what would you say to them? Emily paused longer this time. The room grew quiet. I'd say difficult questions are important. Sunny nodded. But, Emily smiled gently. But thoughtful answers deserve thoughtful questions. The audience reacted immediately. Applause echoed throughout the studio. Even a few crew members exchanged impressed glances behind the cameras. Sunny absorbed the answer before responding. So respect has to work both ways. Exactly. Emily's voice remained calm. If curiosity begins with respect, people usually learn something. And if it doesn't, Emily looked across the audience. Then everyone becomes more interested in proving a point than discovering the truth. For several seconds, silence filled the studio. Not uncomfortable silence. Reflective silence. Whoopi broke it with a smile. I think that's one of the better answers we've heard around this table. The audience applauded once more. The conversation began shifting toward Emily's newest film, and for a few minutes everything felt lighter again. She described demanding rehearsals, funny moments with cast members, and the unexpected challenges of filming action scenes. Her natural humor quickly earned genuine laughter from both the audience and the hosts. It seemed the earlier tension had finally faded. Then a producer quietly handed Whoopi an updated cue card during a brief pause. She glanced at it, raised an eyebrow, looked toward Sunny. Sunny noticed the expression. So apparently, Whoopi said with an amused smile, our control room tells us viewers are responding to this discussion faster than almost any interview we've had this season. The audience reacted with surprise. Joy laughed. Well, that explains why everyone's been whispering during the breaks. Emily smiled modestly. I suppose conversations about boundaries resonate with people. Sunny nodded. They clearly do. For the first time since the discussion began, both women shared an understanding smile. Not because either had changed their position, but because they recognized they had managed to disagree without disrespect. The audience rewarded that moment with warm applause. Still, just beyond the bright studio lights, producers watched social media feeds updating by the second. Clips from the interview were already spreading online. Viewers were isolating individual quotes, debating interpretations, and choosing favorite moments before the interview had even ended. Inside the studio, none of that noise was visible. Only the conversation mattered. Only the people in the room. Yet everyone sensed the biggest reaction was no longer happening on the stage. It was beginning far beyond the cameras, where millions of viewers were watching, discussing, and waiting to see what would happen next. The control room monitors refreshed every few seconds as producers watched the growing stream of reactions pouring in from viewers across the country. Comments appeared faster than anyone could read them. Some praised Emily Blunt's thoughtful defense of personal boundaries. Others appreciated Sunny Hostin's willingness to ask difficult questions without raising her voice. Many simply remarked that it was refreshing to watch two people disagree without turning the conversation into a confrontation. None of that was visible on the stage. Emily remained focused on the discussion in front of her. Whoopi glanced toward the audience with a warm smile before speaking. You know, she said, one thing I appreciate is that this conversation never became personal. That's harder than people think. Emily nodded. I've always believed that respect isn't tested when everyone agrees. She paused for a moment. It's tested when they don't. The audience answered with another round of applause. Sunny smiled. I think that's fair. Joy Behar leaned back in her chair. I also think viewers sometimes expect these conversations to end with someone changing their mind. Emily laughed softly. Sometimes the best outcome isn't changing someone's mind. It's understanding why they think the way they do. Sarah Haynes looked toward the audience. That probably applies to a lot more than celebrity interviews. I think it does, Emily replied. For families, for friendships, for workplaces. for almost every disagreement people experience. The room became thoughtful once again. Sunny folded her notes and placed them on the table. Can I ask something that's a little more personal? Not about your private life, but about how you approach these situations. Emily smiled. Of course. When conversations become uncomfortable, how do you stay so calm? Emily considered the question carefully. I wasn't always calm. That answer surprised several people. She continued. Earlier in my career, I felt pressure to answer everything perfectly. I worried about saying the wrong thing. I worried about disappointing people. She smiled gently. Eventually I realized something. You can't control every headline. You can't control every opinion. But you can control whether you respond with patience. The audience listened in complete silence. I've discovered that calm isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice. Sunny nodded thoughtfully. I think many people watching could relate to that. Emily looked toward the audience. I hope so, because most difficult conversations don't happen on television. They happen at dinner tables, in classrooms, between co-workers, between parents and children. She smiled warmly. If we can listen before reacting, we usually learn more. Several audience members stood briefly to applaud before sitting again. Whoopi smiled. Now that's something worth remembering. The discussion shifted naturally toward Emily's career. Joy asked about preparing for emotionally demanding roles. Emily explained how every character required empathy before performance. You can't portray someone honestly if you've already decided you understand everything about them. Sarah smiled. That sounds like another life lesson. Emily laughed. Maybe acting has taught me more about people than cameras ever could. The audience laughed with her. Meanwhile, behind the cameras, producers watched another message arrive from the network. The interview was receiving unusually positive feedback. Not because of controversy, because viewers were describing it as thoughtful. One producer quietly whispered, "Keep rolling." Back at the table, Sunny offered one final reflection. I'll admit something. Emily looked toward her. When I asked that first question today, I expected a completely different conversation. Emily smiled. So did I. Both women laughed. The audience joined them. Sunny continued. I appreciate that you answered every question with respect, even when we clearly approached the topic differently. Emily nodded. And I appreciate thoughtful questions. They gave me the opportunity to explain rather than simply respond. Whoopi looked around the table. I think that's what conversations are supposed to do. The audience applauded warmly. For a moment, nobody rushed to fill the silence. It no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt earned. As the cameras slowly pulled back, the atmosphere inside the studio felt entirely different from the one that had existed less than an hour earlier. The interview had begun as another stop on a promotional tour. It had become something else entirely. Not a confrontation, not a debate, a reminder that genuine conversation could still exist, even in front of millions of viewers. The producers prepared for the final segment, unaware that one last surprise still waited before the broadcast would come to an end. The floor manager quietly counted down the final minutes of the broadcast as the cameras settled into their closing positions. The audience, still captivated by the thoughtful exchange they had witnessed, waited to see how the interview would end. Whoopi looked around the table before smiling warmly. She said, I've been part of thousands of conversations on this stage, and every now and then one reminds us why talking and listening still matters. The audience applauded. Emily smiled appreciatively. I think we're all learning as we go, she replied. None of us has every answer. Sunny nodded. And maybe that's the point. Emily looked toward her. I think it is. Joy Behar leaned forward with a grin. So after all that, I'm curious. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's afraid of being misunderstood, what would it be? Emily paused for a moment before answering. I'd tell them not to let misunderstanding change who they are. The room fell quiet. You can't spend your life trying to control every opinion. You can only choose how you treat people. Sarah Haynes smiled. That's a lesson a lot of us could probably use. The audience responded with another round of applause. Sunny looked thoughtfully at Emily. When this conversation started, I expected us to be discussing celebrity privacy. Emily laughed softly. So did I. But somehow we ended up talking about respect. And maybe that's more important. Sunny smiled. I think you're right. For the first time since the interview began, the two women shared a relaxed laugh that erased whatever tension had existed earlier. The audience noticed it immediately and applauded once more. Behind the cameras, producers watched as the final viewer responses continued to pour in. The overwhelming reaction wasn't about conflict or controversy. Instead, people were praising the calm, respectful discussion that had unfolded live on television. The director quietly signaled that there was only 1 minute remaining. Whoopi turned toward the main camera. "Emily, thank you for joining us today, not just to talk about your latest project, but for sharing your perspective." Emily nodded gratefully. "Thank you all for having me. Conversations don't have to end with everyone agreeing. Sometimes it's enough that everyone feels heard." Those words lingered in the studio. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then the audience rose to its feet. The standing ovation echoed throughout the studio as Emily stood, smiling humbly and waving to the crowd. She thanked each host individually before sharing a respectful handshake with Sunny. There was no dramatic ending, no argument, no winner or loser, only mutual respect. As the closing music filled the studio, the cameras slowly pulled back to reveal the entire stage. The lights shimmered across the audience as the hosts exchanged smiles and the broadcast came to an end. Outside the studio, viewers continued discussing the interview online, sharing their favorite moments and reflecting on the unexpected conversation that had unfolded. What had begun as a routine promotional appearance had become a fictional reminder that patience, empathy, and respectful dialogue can leave a far greater impact than any heated debate ever could. And although the cameras stopped rolling, the conversation continued in the minds of everyone who had watched. Thank you for watching this story on Prime Spotlight. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more talk show stories, and comment below with your thoughts. Which celebrity conversation would you like to see next? Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Until next time, thanks for watching Prime Spotlight.